Washington, D.C. I'd like to thank the chairwoman for holding this hearing focused on properties that the federal government manages. The General Services Administration, or GSA, manages roughly 9,000 federally owned properties and private sector leases in all 50 states and territories. Federal real estate is what makes it possible for the civil service to serve the American people. This is programs like Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, education, care for our veterans, and all of the programs and services that are so vital to our communities, but unfortunately, as we know, are currently under attack. For more than 2 decades across both Republican and Democratic administrations, the Government Accountability Office identified federal property management as a significant challenge, including problems of excess and underutilized space and poor building conditions. All of that is to say that this is a long-standing issue that many administrations have worked on, and it certainly isn't something new. My colleagues and I have consistently worked to improve stewardship of federal real estate so it can better serve the American people, and that is why I would love to make this a bipartisan hearing about how we address the needs of this country and best serve the people of this nation. The last administration disposed of properties saving nearly $2 billion for American taxpayers, and recently Congress worked together to pass bills for additional tools to reform and consolidate the federal property inventory. These efforts also directed the sale of 4 federal buildings, including the one we are here in today. The Inflation Reduction Act also helped to facilitate property consolidation, including reducing the Department of Homeland Security footprint by over 1 million square feet and saving taxpayers over $1 billion over 30 years. But instead of building on these successes and continuing to do what could be characterized as the tedious analytical work on behalf of Americans, the Trump administration is currently taking a fire sale approach of looting the federal government and stripping it for parts to pay for tax cuts that we know will come up in their reconciliation deal. Let's be clear. Republicans are trying to pass legislation right now that would give billionaires permanent tax breaks on the order of $37 trillion over the next 3 decades. And in order to pay for that, they are looting the federal government and taking a page out of the playbook of private equity. Take public assets, privatize them, sell them for profit, lease them back, help your buddies make money. And that is exactly what we're seeing here today. And unfortunately, we've seen this across the federal government since the Trump administration took office. In fact, we have been deeply concerned that the entire DOGE effort has been a front to help support billionaires who are trying to privatize public services. And just this week, we have seen, as Elon Musk is on his exit out of the federal government, he has secured billions of dollars in new contracts across the federal government. Conflict of interest? Yes, absolutely. It appears that he has recently secured contracts and promises for contracts at the Department of Defense, NASA. He has installed Starlink at the White House and is asking to install it at other federal agencies. And we understand that there is the potential to potentially deploy his AI technology across the federal agencies to replace the tens of thousands of federal employees that have recently been illegally fired. That is why we are deeply concerned about the non-data-driven fire sale that the Trump administration is proposing for federal properties, such as the one we're in today. So, I am deeply distraught and dismayed that we do not have an administration witness with us here today, that GSA is not here to answer questions, that yet again Elon Musk is not in front of this committee, and unfortunately we have yet to see a single Trump political appointee in front of this committee or the Oversight Committee. So, we will continue to do our jobs to elucidate what is happening inside the federal government. I look forward to hearing from the witnesses today, and I look forward to talking about how we can actually manage federal properties and the federal workforce to continue to provide the vital services that are needed for the American people. Finally, I just want to say that it is quite rich to talk about the abuse of federal properties after Donald Trump used the historic Postal Service building just down the street during his administration to make millions and millions of dollars from foreign governments while they came and visited him in the Oval Office. So let's make sure that we are doing right by the American people and doing things in a way that is transparent and also in the interest of the public. And with that, I yield back.
Without objection, Rep. Brown from Ohio is waived on to the subcommittee for the purpose of questioning the witnesses at today's hearing. I'm pleased now to introduce today's witnesses. Mr. David Maroney is a director in GOA's physical infrastructure team. He oversees work on federal real property management and the U.S. Postal Service. Mr. Maroney joined GAO in 2004. Mr. John Hart is CEO of Open the Books. Mr. Hart is a veteran of Capitol Hill, having served in the late U.S. Representative and Senator Tom Coburn's longtime communications director and co-author. Mr. Hart helped enact landmark transparency legislation to put federal spending online. Mr. Ron Kendall is the Executive Chairman Emeritus at the National Federal Development Association. He previously served in senior roles in the federal government, including within GSA's Public Buildings Service. Again, I want to thank you all for being here to testify today. Pursuant to Committee Rule 9G, the witnesses will please stand and raise their right hand. Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you are about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? So how much of this real estate is actually being put to use, or what it's worth on the open market? Here's what we do know. Taxpayers spend about $10 billion annually just to operate and maintain all of it. American taxpayers have been drowning in debt, inflation, unaffordable grocery prices, high interest rates, and have been suffering to get by. All while the federal government is pouring billions of dollars into wasteful, empty office buildings and luxurious high-end furniture, which they, the American taxpayers, can't even afford themselves. It's quite a hypocrisy. These buildings sat largely empty during the entire Biden administration, which kept federal office workers at home long after the COVID-19 pandemic ended. By the way, truck drivers, first responders, so many people worked during the pandemic, but federal workers could stay home, and these federal buildings sat empty. Here in D.C., GAO found in 2023 that the vast majority of federal agency headquarter buildings were less than 25% occupied, some much less. Meanwhile, from 2022 to 2024, the backlog of deferred maintenance on the aging buildings the government owns grew from $216 billion to $370 billion. That's more than $1/3 of $1 trillion it will cost to restore them if we don't sell them. What's worse, aside from paying for useless leases and allowing federal buildings to decay, the Biden administration spent billions on high-end furniture for empty buildings during the pandemic. No one was sitting in those chairs or at those desks. Our witness from Open the Books will testify to that. It is only now, under the Trump administration, that we see a light at the end of the tunnel. This administration is taking historic action on reducing the size of the government, and with it, a significant reduction in the useless office space that is claimed to be essential for the government to operate. GSA has established a goal to reduce the size of the federally owned real estate footprint by 50%. This is a massive real estate auction. The President issued an executive order instructing agencies to update their property inventory and to determine which of their government-leased or government-owned spaces they don't need. In just the few months since Inauguration Day, DOGE and the General Services Administration have sold off several federal properties and worked with agencies to eliminate hundreds of unneeded taxpayer-funded office leases. More specifically, they've canceled nearly 700 federal leases of 7.9 million square feet of space, saving taxpayers around $400 million. One of the canceled leases was a nearly $250 million 15-year lease at a luxury office building on Pennsylvania Avenue to house Voice of America and the United States Agency for Global Media. The Biden administration signed the lease late last year, sticking taxpayers with the tab. It's one of the fanciest office buildings in the city. You can see of the building on this poster board. Incredible. Furthermore, this beautiful building had zero broadcasting capabilities, a capability one would think would be essential for a broadcasting media agency. The cost to taxpayers to build out the building with broadcasting capabilities, $130 million. The Biden team wanted to move USAGM and Voice of America from this building that we are sitting in today into that luxury space. Instead, the president is shutting down the whole state-run media operation, and taxpayers will be spared a $250 million lease and millions more for renovations and security measures. This is just one example of countless egregious abuses of leases and contracts being paid out across the federal government. Another egregious abuse of taxpayer dollars regarding federal property was the $200 million the FBI received last year for a new headquarters in Maryland. While the FBI was going after the American people, parents at school board meetings, and many others, our federal government gave them hundreds of millions of dollars of American tax dollars for a brand new, beautiful headquarters. Federal agencies shouldn't be maintaining empires at taxpayer expense. That's why GSA, the federal landlord agency driving this reform process, plans to lead by example. Imagine that. It intends to vacate its current headquarters building in downtown D.C. and co-locate with another agency. Then it will sell the GSA headquarters. Before I close, I'll note that Congress also acted on this front in January. We passed a law requiring federal building occupancy to be tracked and for low occupancy buildings to be sold. But it will take a willing partner in the White House to implement that law and to take other steps to shrink the federal real estate empire. We now have that partner, and I look forward to working with the Trump administration and DOGE to finally right-size the federal real estate footprint. And with that, I yield to Ranking Member Stansbury for her opening statement.
All right. Well, good morning. I always enjoy a field hearing, and it's nice to be out in the field here in Washington. Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. Mr. Maroney, I'm grateful that you're here. I know in the report that GAO has published that real estate of the federal government has been on the high-risk list since 2003, and part of that is that we're not disposing of it and taking care of it in as quickly a process is needed. So I think this is an issue that we have bipartisan agreement on. Certainly, if you're overinvested in assets, it's something that you need to deal with as a business. But, I'm a former OMB employee. I was a nonpartisan a federal official, and I worked on the Department of Interior's portfolio. And one of the things that the American public may not realize is that when the federal government is trying to figure out how to reconfigure its federal property footprint, there's a whole planning process that begins. So you first work with the federal agencies. You identify, are they going to change the configuration of how they're using space based on sharing of desk space? If there's laboratories needed, do they need to be physically located in certain spaces? This is what any company does, right? They try to figure out where their employees are going to be located. Then there's a planning process with the actual real estate itself, because in many cases you can't dispose of your leases without investing in construction and improvements because of the terms of a lease, if it's a lease, or if you're trying to dispose of the property and get fair market value. So what I really want to highlight here is that we need an expedited process, but any private company or public entity would have to go through an extensive planning process to do it in a way that would get a fair shake for the taxpayers. Would you agree with that?
There's certainly planning steps you want to take.
Absolutely. So the idea of just putting out a list of hundreds of federal properties, including some of the most valuable real estate in Washington, D.C. on the federal mall, including the headquarters of every major federal agency, is not a planning process. That is a fire sale of some of the most valuable real estate properties in Washington, D.C. Now, we all know that Donald Trump is a real estate developer. Let's not lose sight of that. And certainly he understands the significance of the disposal of properties in the most valuable real estate in our nation's capital. So I think it's important that we keep that in mind as we're thinking about, is the intentions of what DOGE is doing, are they actually in the public interest? And Mr. Maroney, I want to also go back to kind of the bigger economic context, because I think it actually relates to the issues that we're dealing with this week in the House. In fact, Donald Trump has put into place tariffs last week that are causing the markets to tank. Right now, the economy is in complete free fall, and House Republicans are whipping votes to try to get this new package across the finish line that would give permanent tax breaks to billionaires, and the markets are completely shook by it. And I know this is outside your purview, but the issue here is that anyone who works in real estate right now knows that this is not a good time to sell real estate. Would you agree with that?
It is a challenging time, particularly in commercial offices.
Absolutely. So that's the point I want to make. If we're talking about actually getting value for the taxpayers, then doing a fire sale of federal properties and then putting into place expensive leases where the federal government would spend federal taxpayer dollars to lease back from private entities at this moment as the market is in free fall and the real estate market is in complete tanking at the moment is not a good use of taxpayer dollars. Like, this is a terrible idea at this moment, and it needs to be done through a sane process. Now, Mr. Hart, I was interested in your testimony, and I actually just want to follow up. You used in your testimony a bunch of times this concept of dismantling the administrative state. And so I'm just curious, do you view the disposal of federal real estate as part of dismantling the administrative state?
No, I view it as empowering taxpayers and transferring wealth from Washington to individual Americans. So I think it's probably one of the best economic stimulus programs you could have.
May I ask, Mr. Hart, is your agenda?
Strongly oppose OMB and OPM's recent directive to federal agencies to, quote, propose relocations of agency, bureaus, and offices from Washington, D.C. and the National Capital Region to less costly parts of the country, end quote. I also strongly oppose the many bills that have been introduced this Congress to relocate the headquarters for federal agencies in the National Capital Region to outside the National Capital Region. These relocations, as we saw during the first Trump administration, would harm the operations of these agencies and waste taxpayer dollars. They would also harm the economy of the National Capital Region and upend the lives of federal workers, many with kids who love their homes and schools. Last month, I introduced a bill to prohibit such relocations. However, there are specific federal buildings in D.C. that GSA should dispose of in an orderly manner and move the employees from those buildings into other buildings in D.C. These disposals would save the federal government money and could generate tax revenue for D.C., increase housing supply, and create new mixed-use neighborhoods in the District of Columbia. There is precedent for orderly disposals of federal property in D.C. Congress has passed many of my bipartisan bills to transfer unused or underutilized federal buildings and land in D.C. to the D.C. government or the private sector, including the Webster School, the development of the wharf and the yards, and most recently the RFK Stadium campus. Mr. Kendall, I believe that there needs to be an orderly process for disposing of federal buildings in D.C. as opposed to putting many federal buildings up for sale at the same time. How would putting many federal buildings in D.C. up for sale at the same time affect the price the federal government could get for the buildings and the value of